So thank you all for joining us. My job is to do the welcome and say the open house is now open. And throughout the open house, we hope, although it's only an hour long, there'll be plenty of time for you to raise a question in the chat. We're pretty good at keeping an eye on the chat and ensuring that we can be as interactive and as inclusive of you all as possible. So don't sit on a comment. And if you really want to unmute, there'll be some reflective spots throughout. So if you want to unmute, you're welcome to unmute at that stage when we call you in to offer your input. I'm Jo Eadie, as I said, and I've been really fortunate over the last 18 months to work with Nicole McDonald, who you'll meet in a moment and many of you will know, working on this SHIFT project, which is all about going behind the farm gate and developing trust with growers to hear their stories and to design some of the workforce initiatives that or impacts that we've taken care of in SHIFT. We hope we've taken care of them anyway. And we're going to let you in on those. You'll probably feel maybe slightly overwhelmed because Nick gave you access to absolutely all of the resources in the email confirmation coming through onto Zoom today. Nick's going to start the session by giving you the kind of the researchy background as to the process we went through and how that went, warts and all. And then I'm going to pop back in later in the Zoom call and share the practical side. So the way Nick and I like to introduce ourselves is I'm the practitioner. So I'm the farmer interface type of a person, and Nick's the researcher. And we formed a relationship through SHIFT and another project, which means that I don't ever want to work on projects again where there's not a researcher involved, because the incredible insight that you gain from the research gives us the opportunity to design the solutions that we have for growers. So that's all for me. Please take a moment to have a look in your chat. You can see how many amazing people have come on to join you today. And Nick, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay,
let's have a great session.
Let's see if I remember how to share my screen after yesterday. Cool. Okay, let me just grab this. Has everyone got that up on their screen? Can you see that one?
Do.
Sweet, excellent. Thanks so much for joining us today. So today we're just going to use today's session to give you a bit of a background about the SHIFT project, like Jo said. We'll go through some of the resources that we've had a look at, and then we're keen to sort of hear some of your questions. So basically the SHIFT project was a research development and extension project, or is, that seeks to transform years of research insights about workforce challenges and experiences in the cotton industry into something that could be useful to support on-farm teams to be engaging, adaptable, effective, and productive. So it's focused firmly on supporting people to be their best selves at work, with the idea that how we build great teams at work is part of how we retain them, and how we retain people actually becomes our authentic attraction stories that shows people why they would want to be a part of this industry. So that's a bit of a background there. So as Jo said, I'm a researcher. I'm really talented to actually work in a team of researchers at CQUniversity. I thought I'd just give you a bit of a background to what our team does. So we like to think that we work on a whole range of different research projects that help actually build that talent pipeline for Australian agriculture. So here you can see we've got work that we're working on with primary and secondary school students. We work with teachers and career advisors. We have a look at some of those transitions either into work or tertiary study pathways. And then I usually hang out up in this on-farm work culture, workforce kind of area. Our team's led by Associate Professor Amy Cosby, who I think is on today's call as well. And our education stream is led by Dr. Jamie Manning. So that's a bit of the work that we do. But yeah, I love this on-farm work culture space. So a bit of background before we did the SHIFT project. This is kind of where the cotton industry had been over the last decade. So these statistics come from the Grower Practices Survey that's run annually. And there's always some workforce or training kind of questions that are usually added in to help us kind of monitor where growers are at with their teams. So over the years, we had growers report 30% of growers had retention challenges, 50% of growers had attraction challenges. Those questions were asked right after it had rained and production was ramping back up again. But interestingly, in that 25% of growers actually said both those retention and attraction challenges were ongoing issues. It wasn't just because of the seasonal change. We know that 2 in 5 growers were spending more time working than they wanted to. We also had a similar amount reporting that they weren't getting as much sleep as they wanted to, or getting to spend as much time with family than they wanted to. So we knew we had some challenges around burnout potentially in industry. We did have 92% of growers saying that getting the right employees on farm is critical to their business. So there was that acknowledgement of how important a good team is. But 50% of them were saying it was hard to get the staff they needed for the farm to be at its most productive. And part of staff being productive team members is making sure they've got the skills that they need to be a member of your team. And I thought it was really interesting that, 20% of growers were reporting that there was no impact from accredited education and training. So they were sending their team off to upskill, coming back, and it wasn't necessarily transferring to improve practice on farm. And that was a really important insight for us, because we know that on-farm teams really want to learn on the job and in the workplace. So when we were looking at the shift project, we were really keen to see how we could get some of this development work into everyday workflows of a farm, and not necessarily bringing out people into short courses and those sorts of things. We also knew that we did ask cotton growers around how much they value their workforce, and we knew that over 95% of cotton growers actually say that they want their team members to feel like a valued part of their business. Now, it's a bit of a setup, right? There's a social desirability bias when people answer that questions. People want to tell you that that is important to them. But there is also that genuine sentiment there. And you can see there we've got this quote from Mick Humphries, who we've worked with over the years, that, it's about working with us, not for us. And what that stat does is it actually gives us a really great entry point to come out to cotton growers and say, well, you've told us that it's important that this happens with your team members. Let's have a chat about how we can support you to make that work. Or if you're making it work, tell us what you're doing so we can share it with other people as well. So it was a bit of that. We're going to help you walk the talk, but also let's start being able to talk the walk that's going on. I really wanted to highlight that, like I said, this is building off 10 years of research. So there has been a plethora of research programs in the cotton industry focused on workforce over the years. All of that information has been so useful for us shaping up this system. So I know we've got Ruth Nettle on the call today. Her work has been amazing in that space. Gordy Stone might be on here too. So I just think the value of research in this space is so brilliant, because you have that grounded perspective. You've got that qualitative stories from cotton growers. You've got that quantitative statistics to kind of talk about impact of different factors on job satisfaction, work engagement, all those sorts of things. It's so valuable. So with the Shift project, what we set out to try and do was sort of ask, can we do for people management what My BNP has done for environmental management? So in the cotton industry, My BNP was implemented a while ago, and we saw a big uptick in not just environmental practices on farm, but also the industry being able to talk about the good environmental practices that were on farm there too. We wanted to know, could we support growers and managers to expand their toolkit when it came to developing their team on farm? We also were curious about whether we could get something into the hands of employees to help them take greater ownership of their own development and careers in the industry. We were keen to look at, what are the standards that we think make a great workplace in the industry? And more importantly, can we open up this conversation with people on farms about how people are managing people in their teams? It's really natural for cotton growers to talk about their technical practices in growing their crops. Could we start to actually share some of that knowledge and get it flowing across enterprises in the industry? So this is the program of work that we engaged in. So there were probably 3 distinct stages that we could have a look at. Right at the top, we wanted to investigate different pathways to delivery. The intention was always not just to run a pilot program that was centered on the efforts of Joe and myself, that would live and die with the funding for the project, but, what were the legacy resources that we could create? And then how were they going to infiltrate the knowledge networks or all the avenues that cotton growers were already accessing for information about, their businesses and their farms. So we, had conversations with all of these different groups. And then we knew from some of the insights from especially our extension officers and probably our Cotton Australia regional managers and even the MyBMP program team that we needed to go where the pain points were for growers. So when we look at workforce development or trying to support people with their on-team development, it's a really big space. And top down, we could do all sorts of different stuff, but was it actually the stuff that people needed and was going to be used? We didn't really know. So we had to form this kind of co-design group, which we called the Shift Solutions Group. We put a call out to industry saying, tell us your workforce challenge. From there, we recruited a group of about 8 cotton growers to kind of work through this problem identification, problem clarification, solution generation process. It involved interviews, farm visits with teams, and we really clearly needed to deliver value to those growers who were going to engage with us. So we were looking to address a specific enterprise challenge for them and generate a solution that was going to be specific to them and their business. But through that, you can actually start to get a bit of an overview of what could actually be general information that could be widely disseminated to industry. So we're really clear up front. We think this is an enterprise solution for you and your business and really mindful of confidentiality and protecting them there, but also having those discussions of them. Well, would you be open for us sharing this insight? We think this would be really valuable for whole of industry to look at. We ran workshops to test the outputs that we developed, all of those sorts of things. So that really intense co-design process. We then went into extension activities. Throughout the project, from right at the very beginning, we began to build awareness about some of this stuff and some of these terms. So we put out articles in the Australian Cotton Grower magazine, just so that perhaps when people came across the Shift project, and they heard say the term psychological safety, which is one of the topics one of our team members, Chantel Corish, is investigating, that it wasn't a completely new topic for them. They'd already had some exposure in, a magazine that they read every day. They could think, oh, I've heard that term before, those kinds of things. So we've got that awareness raising piece. And then we started to run activities with cotton growers. We ran a virtual conference where we did a series of grower panels and then a couple of workshops around some of the skills involved in it. And from there, we knew what had really resonated with people were the grower panels. So strongly facilitated grower panels with myself and Joe involved so that we could unpack growers' stories of practice. I'd highlight the evidence underpinning the practice. Joe would talk about what she'd seen across industry, that real collaborative kind of knowledge sharing piece. And we brought that into those virtual farm catch-ups. I think it's really important for us to note too, in those virtual farm catch-ups, we were really protective of the space. We wanted growers to come along to learn, reflect, and not just be passive recipients of information. So we made them farmer-only spaces. It did mean a couple of awkward conversations with some people who registered with great intentions, wanting to know about the project and learn more. But it was really important for us to make those online spaces peer-to-peer and only peer-to-peer in terms of people who are in the trenches, who know the challenges that people are experiencing every day on farm, who are living that as well. So that's something that we did with that piece there. We've got a range of legacy outputs, which you got the table in the email. And so that's kind of Shift program of work in a bit of a snapshot. When we asked people, right back thinking about that Shift Solutions group, what your workforce challenge was, and we started going through that process to really deep dive into where we were going to take the project. These were the challenges people came up with in the cotton industry. I'd be so curious to know if you're from other industries, if this is what you're hearing from your producers as well. So people were telling us that recruitment was harder than it had ever been in the past. They used to be able to recruit by word of mouth. That was drying up. There were all sorts of challenges there. People weren't responding necessarily to formal recruitment targeted campaigns. So there were all sorts of challenges there. New team members were greener than they'd ever been before. And by that, they just meant new people were showing up with a real unawareness about workplaces in general or the farm environment. And just, no sort of baseline exposure there. People spoke about non-technical skills needing development, and I'll dig into what we talk about when we're talking about non-technical skills in just a moment. And psychosocial wellbeing was a real challenge for employers and some of their team members as well. And what we mean by that was when they couldn't get the staff that they needed, the good team members were working longer and harder themselves. So there was that real potential for burnout to happen there. So we really needed to have some of that wellbeing focused within our project as well. So that's kind of where we were at with workforce challenges. So with non-technical skills, I'm sure you all have your own terms for this out there. We often hear people talk about non-technical skills as soft skills. Career development practitioners talk about employability skills or adaptability skills. I've heard them referred to in innovation spaces as evergreen skills. We really found the term non-technical skills resonated with people on farm. You've got technical skills, you've got non-technical skills. It put them on more of an even weighting. So that's kind of where we went at with that terminology there.
Nick, can I just say that I'm starting to hear the non-technical term being used, and I would like to think that it's being used because it's come through, this project and other projects that some other people have been involved with on today's call. And I think it would be really fabulous for Australian agriculture to have the same word. Soft skills is one I was trying to mention before, and the growers that we work with just say they really don't resonate with the term soft skills, and nor do they resonate with terms like, power skills that are out there. So I just want to give a plug to everyone to say it would be really fabulous if we had one way of communicating about these non-technical skills across all of our sectors.
Yeah, and we really sort of leaned into non-technical skills. It comes from the safety space and the human factors kind of research that happens in safety. There's a really great research team out of the University of Aberdeen that has worked on a project of the farmer list of non-technical skills over there in Scotland. Got in contact with the researcher over there. It doesn't all have to be your own idea, and really learnt from her as well. So I can put more details about that project in the chat too. I reckon anyone who's working in work health and safety would find their research really interesting as well. So I'll do that later on when I'm sort of off presenter mode. We're really keen to hear from you guys, for you to have a think about your industry and how it operates and what you think the non-technical skills are that are required for farmers and their teams to be at their best. So if you're happy to share in the chat, if you're not, we'll just give you a minute to pop a few things in there.
And as we take a moment, Tammy's let me know that my mic is a bit low. So if you need to pop up your microphone to hear Nick or I any better, please do. And Alicia has got a gorgeous message in the chat there just saying, yeah, the soft skills, power skills kind of stuff sounds like it's a bit of a nice to have. Whereas I think what we're wanting to do is to say it's a have to have. And for enterprises not to take non-technical skills and technical skills kind of in the same weight is going to continue to see, I think, some issues happen across our enterprises. So there's a challenge. It's just a challenge for today. And one of the benefits of having this open house, of having different sectors involved that we can share.
Absolutely. And I think on that note too, Alicia, the question often, one of the questions for us is it's great to have a chat to growers or leaders of enterprises about non-technical skills because of the kind of work that they do. We think they would get it, but would the farmhand, right at that kind of, above entry level, would they actually get us talking to them about non-technical skills on farm? So we ran a bit of a workshop with, not the growers that we've been working with on the solutions, but their teams that were further below them. And what we found was they absolutely get it. Like, we spoke to them briefly around, what we would define as non-technical skills. And we got them to think about, well, what are the non-technical skills that you need to be able to be a good team member, work well at work, get the job done, like you said, Alicia, drive the way forward. And this is what they came up with. I think one of my favorite is don't bottle it up, don't be a mason jar. That young guy was just brilliant to talk to. But I think anytime we have that, do or don't, we're talking about a behavior. If we're talking about a behavior, we're talking about a skill that can be learned or developed. So, and they just got it. They got it. And so we found that technical, non-technical skills just super useful there. But that's given us a bit of an overview of it. We're going to jump into some of the resources that we've developed around these non-technical skills that we pinpointed were going to be of use to industry. So I might pop it over to you, Jo, if that's okay, and I'll stop sharing screen.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, everyone. I think before we jump into me having a little chat with you about the resources and where we went, I'd be really keen just to pause for a minute for questions or comments if anyone's come up with anything that they want to share or ask about. So I want to chat now just for a little bit about what we found when we went behind the farm gate and when we chatted to the 8 growers that Nick talked about who came on as part of the solutions team. Hats off to them. They had no idea what they were getting in for. They knew that we were looking for something, but we weren't able to provide them with that, hey, this is what you're going to get at the end, because co-design doesn't do that. As many of you will know, it forms its pathway and its impact kind of outcomes as it goes through. What we knew very early on from open conversation was that the responsibility and the care for staff that managers, team leaders, and the owners of businesses in the cotton industry that we worked in on this project have is huge. And the people we work with in particular said that they have heavy shoulders at the end of the day because they're hoping that they're doing the right thing, but they're not 100% sure, and they're actually wanting to do the best they possibly can. So I wanted to start by saying that the responsibility and of care for the greener staff members, but any staff members, does sit heavily on people's shoulders. It backs up a point that Nick made earlier about giving some resources to the new staff members or to the ongoing staff members themselves to be able to have a sense of their, or give them a purpose in their own development so that they don't just wait for either the industry or for the employer or for a team meeting to be able to access those skills.
Hey, Jo, Marianne Watson's just commented, in her experience that, people don't want to mother their staff. And that was something we heard too. Yeah. Absolutely. That, but I think that was one of our motivation with what we've developed with this non-technical guide.
Yeah. And we had people tell us, we don't want to be their parents. We want to be their supporters. We want to be their champions. And we want to give them an offer and support them more than just with our spoken voices. So that came up big time for us as well, Marianne. So we went ahead based on the non-technical skills that the people in the solutions group and those that they work with told us that they needed. We went ahead and we made these incredible 13 in almost overwhelm, what we call micro-learning guides, which you've got. So it's the big long list. We took that back out, we chatted, and we were absolutely worried. We didn't make all 13 and go back out. We made one and said, what do you reckon? Is this language going to be accessible? Do you feel that you could use this? And we had the growers tell us, yeah. The least we will do is send that out, or the least we will do is include some of this in our induction packages. And we went, okay, great. So that will provide some information to staff members. They said, what we'd really love is we'd love to develop the skills ourselves in being able to have one-on-one or small group or whole of enterprise chats about some of this non-technical stuff. So where we thought the end point of the project was going to be these micro learning guides, it certainly wasn't. And we felt a very strong responsibility, and we went back, and that's where the 2 non-technical guides came into play. And so what we did there was we took what we knew from the research were the most important pieces, the most important topics, and we gathered them and put them together in a non-technical guide for new entrants and a non-technical guide for team leaders. This got a bigger round of applause than what the info learning guides got. And we do know, because we've tested the non-technical guides, that they have gone out to a wider number of people, either just as growers got them from Nick and I, or they've gone out by way of induction at the beginning of 2025. And we've had a number of people contact us wanting to do that. It suited growers who don't feel confident and don't feel competent to be able to run a little team meeting. It suited them to be able to send that out. Nick, can I keep going on and just share about the one-on-one coaching piece?
Yeah, go for it, Jo. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've had a few growers who have said to us, we want to get the max from these resources. How would we do that? So last year we ran a pilot with a grower in northern New South Wales, and they became the coach of Shift, which is the name for all of these materials. They became the coach of it within their workplace, and they've trialed it with 3 of their staff. So this is like all very great to have those resources that you see in front of you, but from a grower's perspective, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, there's 13 of these, how do I use them? Or there's 2 non-technical guides, how on earth do I use those? So in the trial, I coached the manager of the business in saying, hey, let's do it over a 3-month period, send out the non-technical guide first, and in 2 weeks, the staff member and you have a conversation, and there were just some basic questions to ask in a 20 to 30 minute session. And there were things like, have you read it? What did you think? Was there something that hit home for you? What's something that you think is really important for your team right now? That was it. There was no content-y kind of stuff that was required from the manager on farm. They got through the session. They felt like the staff member had the opportunity to really, really lean into taking control of that conversation. And after we did it for the first 2 weeks with the non-technical guide, we then did the remainder of the 3 months with every fortnight. We sent out either 1 or 3, because those micro learning guides are actually clumped into areas, and you'll see that on the document that Nick sent out to you. And so again, they were just sent out with some prompt questions, which were the same as what I've just shared with you. And then back they came for a chat. The result of that, one person not interested at all, did what they were asked, went through a transactional process of, yeah, I've read it. Yeah, no worries, I can meet you for 20 minutes. And the manager had to really guide strongly that session. Another one who came in, everything printed, highlighted, questions, and wanting to say, hey, how can I get success happening better in my team, and grilling the manager about some tips and tricks from their experience that they can offer. And then the third one is a really interesting one. The third one is someone who's not at a team leader level, but has expressed interest in it. And the manager has said, well, let's see if they've got an interest in this non-technical side. Let's do Shift with them, because we want people in the team leader position who have an understanding of the technical and the non-technical stuff. So that one's just in the process of finishing at the moment, and it's going really well as well. So pleased to have done it. And the feedback has been there's a place for it. And there's a real gain for managers and team leaders, because there's no cost, there's limited cost in terms of loss of staff off farm, and limited cost in terms of the cost of delivery. So we went right round to this one-on-one coaching, upping the capacity of the manager at the same time as we're supporting them to increase the non-technical capacity on farm. Highly contextualized, because the people and the events and the actions that get sorted about are very enterprise specific. So it's an interesting one, because sometimes those of us who have worked in this field for a while are called FIFO facilitators. We fly in, we work with an enterprise, we fly out. I'm lucky to have both sides, because I've worked behind the farm gate mainly, not keen to do too much more FIFO, when research tells us that getting in behind the farm gate and capacity building manager as well as the team, and ultimately leading to enhancements within the enterprise, is the way to go. It's kind of a bit of a no-brainer for me. So I'm to the end of my little run there, and would love to just stop for a moment. And again, questions, queries, what are your thoughts? Do you do things already like this in your sectors? Here's Kate's got a question, Kate Lumber from Pool Ag. How do we have any suggestions on how to get team buy-in for non-technical skills? Which is exactly what I was saying. One of the things that we know works, Kate, is farmers trust farmers. And so when we had our 8 people in that solutions group, when they then chatted to others about involvement, it was a no-brainer. People said, oh yeah, Mick said come along, so I came along, or Matt said come along, so I kind of came along. We know that opens, the bottle a little bit, or opens the door a little bit. So it's the trusted relationships that we develop with those people within the industry that will help us to get through. There's no doubt that most of us who work in the industry know that, there's gatekeepers at all places, not just the farm gate either. So it's the trust that we need to develop there. Talk about it, I reckon talk about it. And even today, we come up with these crazy ideas, right? Nick and I, we travel too much. We come up with these crazy ideas around, why don't we have this open house? Or why don't we share this with other sectors? Because we're so sector specific. And with workforce, we've got limited resources and limited time, as Paul indicated earlier about, issues on farm and fatalities on farm. Spot on, because one of the topics that you'll see in the non-technical guide for new entrants is, how you show up for success, how you can get yourself into a place where your mental plus your physical, your home plus your work actually align. And a couple of the new entrants in one farming business we spoke to was, it would have been great, to even think about things like you've got to bring sunscreen, especially with the international people who worked on farm. It wasn't something that they were aware that they really needed to do. That really knocked the socks off a group of workers for quite some time. As Diana said, living remote, couldn't get into the supermarket, felt a little bit at odds about asking managers, hey, have you got some spare sunscreen, that sort of stuff. It really disorientates them and knocks them for a sixer. And then they get affected by, we're so isolated here, why have we come here? And hence we get that spiral of people suddenly going, this is not for me. Yeah. And we just a little thing like sunscreen can do that. And another one was, a couple of people talked to us about, it would have been really great to know that you chuck a spare pair of shoes or thongs in the ute when you're going down to look at an irrigation drain and that sort of stuff, because you don't wear boots in there. And yet here was all our new entrants showing up with beautiful new boots and socks. And then within the same day, the first day, muddy and all the stuff going home. So little stories like that really disorientate new entrants or new workers to an extent where they will destabilise in our experience and will feel like they don't fit in here. Mm. We've got one manager who is talking about using the new entrants guide to send out before staff actually come on farm, so that they have time to digest the new entrants guide. And I think it's a farmer who sends a few things out before people show up for work as well. Any other questions or comments? There's an education piece in the chat as well saying, you know, how do we ready, you know, young people to become more interested and become more prepared to work in agriculture? And I guess that's why we're all here today. Nick, would you like to share any insights from the team development guide? Because out of everything we've done in Shift, they've all worked beautifully. There's been no problems.
Yeah.
These two guides have been the ones that growers in particular have really, really honed in on and are already using. I wonder whether you want to add any insights just from the team leader guide.
Yep, excellent. So the team leader guide we kind of put together because, like Joe said, sort of those 13 micro learning guides are kind of a bit overwhelming when they hit you. And we had people who'd identified really keen workers on their farm who had the technical skills to be a manager, but they wanted to kind of, like Joe said, test whether they had those non-technical skills or they wanted to upskill them in non-technical skills. So we put together a bit of a team leader guide. And one of the first things we sort of talked to them about in the guide is, you know, how you learn your non-technical skills. So that kind of meta skill piece of like, you know, because we often hear people say, oh, I learned it through experience, but I know plenty of people who've had plenty of experiences and nothing changes. And so we just really emphasize that you learn it through experience, reflection, and then a commitment to a behavior change. So we talk to them about that. We talk to them about what you might need to reflect on to build that self-awareness. And one of the things that Mick Humphreys really brought to my attention was in one of our virtual farm catch-ups where he's talking about, you know, coaching your team for effectiveness. And he sort of said one of the things he had to reflect on was his triggers. We often talk about people reflecting on like their behaviors in the workplace, but breaking it down to what's a behavior that someone might show that is actually one of your triggers for you for whatever reason. So in yesterday's catch up with the farmers, I sort of shared that my trigger as an example is punctuality, because time is something that I have strong values about, and valuing people's time to me is a sign of respect. And, you know, if someone's late to something that they've wanted me to show up to help them with do something and they're late, my trigger is to go, oh, well, they don't really have much respect for me. But, you know, you have to recognize that that's a trigger for you, step back, use your humility to sort of go, well, the world doesn't revolve around me, and, you know, get your curiosity hat on and think about, well, what's going on with that person that's causing that, and then start to sort of work through that. So we think that team leader guide, it has pieces on leadership in there, like really practical skills around delegation too. And I guess not just delegation from first you identify the task and then you figure who's got the skills for it. But, you know, from a cotton grower I interviewed about delegation, he said the hardest thing for him was to realize that he wasn't so special and to learn to drop the ego so he could delegate. You know, it's those kinds of beautiful pieces of practice that are actually resonating with people and giving them like a map of behaviors that they can adopt or try or test out in their workplace. With that, I might just jump into some final insights that we've got here about, I guess, some contextual things that you might want to think about if you're wanting to look at doing something like Shift in your industry or replicating it, the work, or doing something along those lines. So bear with me for one moment.
I should have also mentioned too, we had a grower talk to us recently about they didn't send out the whole of the non-technical guide to the new entrant. They actually screenshotted a couple of the snippets that they thought were the most important pieces at this point in time for their new entrant employee, and they sent that via just an attachment on phone. So getting the information out to the staff themselves, the employees themselves, as Mick indicated before, is something that we'd really love to encourage everyone to think about, going past the owner, manager, team leader, and looking at how we can support those employees.
Hi, Joe, do you mind if I just ask a quick question?
Go for it, Michaela.
I'm so sorry I can't turn my video off. Good old Telstra on my Wednesday morning. Just quickly, I'm really curious to know, if you happen to have any feedback from producers or leaders that was sort of more negative towards non-technical skills. Obviously, there's that traditional norm of only hiring for experience or connection to growing up on farm. Just wondering if you happen to have any feedback through the Shift project and how you guys manage that.
So the key feedback that we got has already come out, which is we're not their parents. We're not their mothers. That was the first one that came out, or their fathers. Why should we be having to do this stuff? And then the second piece that came out was, doesn't anybody have any common sense anymore? How do we teach common sense? And we kind of think that by putting these guides together, it is a little bit common sense, but it's actually just good damn practice, to show from an enterprise and an industry perspective, this is the way we do things. We care for you, and we really want you there.
Yeah.
The other negative is about time. I'm really driven to do the technical side of growing the crop, irrigating the crop, harvesting the crop, seeding the crop. Do I really have to have time for this as well? Once we are behind the farm gate and we have a chat, we have growers turn around and say to us, oh my God, this is the glue that holds this together. This is the place where we actually need to start, really. And someone's even said to us, this is why our teams are breaking. This is why we're not being able to hold them together, because we're not learning and developing the glue that we need. Nick might have some insights for Michaela too there.
Yeah, Michaela, I might just jump into the slides now, which gives a little bit of context to, why we were able to have success where we were, what worked, and then what are some cautionary tales of some of the work that we did too that we think needs to be considered. So from our perspective, we were able to do this kind of transformational work because we actually got flexibility from the funding body. So a big shout out to Rachel Holloway from CRDC. So we came to her with the concept of what we wanted to do with Shift, a bit of a plan. After the first phase of the research, we realised we actually needed to change the whole project. We didn't know exactly what the outcome or the output was going to be because we were co-designing that along the way. That requires trust from a funding body when you're going to them to say, look, we want to do this work. We don't know exactly what you're going to get in the end, but we're going to, find a way forward with cotton growers to make it suitable for them. So that was really important. It was really important to get the engagement from cotton growers. And because Joe and I have worked in the cotton industry for so long, so I've been researching with cotton growers for 10 years. Joe's been running Australian Future Cotton Leaders for quite some time. We had a reputation in the industry. There was trust of us as practitioners and researchers that we wouldn't waste people's time. And that's why we actually really wanted to have this session with all of you too, because the right person to do this sort of work is the person who has the trusted relationship with the producer. It's not just me and Joe roaming around the country everywhere to do it. It's, trying to, I guess, talk to you about what we've learned and what we've kind of done and making things available to you. I guess, because we know that you guys are the trusted kind of resource, the trusted person to support that farmer or that grower to look at doing this with their team. We did have that existing body of research. I can't emphasize how much, and I know it seemed like it may not seem very practical to some people, but being able to say, well, we've done a study and we've seen with people who work on cotton farms that there is no relationship between being anxious at work or how anxious you are and your scores on work engagement or dedicated enthusiasm. That means to us as an employer, you cannot tell if your employer how they're feeling when it comes to feeling of anxiety at work. They could still be showing up and working really hard at work every day until they fall off that cliff. So as a practice, we want you to make sure that you're checking in with people to make sure that they feel secure. They know what they're meant to be doing. They know if they're doing a good job. They're not left to wonder if they're doing a bad job or if people hate them at work or, when people are left in isolation, which they can be in our farm environment sometimes, thoughts spiral and they start to tell themselves stories. They fill the space. So, as a team leader, we want you to make sure that you're clear and you're setting up really clear workplaces for people to work in. We also had because of that research culture in the industry, a culture where growers value workforce research. So, you know, we had a baseline to start to work with that then we can, as Joe said, growers become the advocates for the work, and then they spread it through their networks. And before you know it, someone who perhaps hasn't been turned on to this kind of stuff in the past is actually considering it, or willing to have a listen, or come along and just hang in the background while something's going on. And then you start to see that shift happen.
And usually, Nick, the way it manifests for us is that we'll take a phone call and it'll be, you know, John Bloggs, who we don't know, and he'll say, hey, I don't really know what I'm calling for, but blah has asked me to give you a buzz because I'm a bit interested in this people stuff, but I really don't know what I'm calling for. And we get a call like that once a fortnight, and we love them because it's that contemplative stage. And we go, yeah, there's another farmer out there who's recommended to another farmer to give us a buzz, and then out go the shift materials with a little bit of a quick, you know, on-call example of how they might be able to use those.
Yeah. So this is some of the feedback from what worked from participants. And these are sort of, I guess, I've done the presenter bad and put a hell of a lot of text on a slide. But I guess what that kind of lets you know is that the guides were practical, they were considered useful and easy to use. So one of the growers I spoke to said, you've sort of taken something that is a textbook kind of thing and actually broken it down into what is real in our work environment. When growers came to our virtual farm catch-up, a lot of them were surprised that they were all struggling with similar things. And one of the things that came out of that was they just didn't feel so alone in some of the struggles that they had in their businesses, which I wasn't expecting that response really. I guess because I'm talking to everyone, I'm like, oh yeah, you do all struggle with this. But to hear it from another grower talking about what some of their challenges are was really powerful for people to not feel alone in their experience, and to realize that maybe it wasn't a mountain, it was more of a molehill, and there were some really practical small things that they could do that wouldn't solve everything but could move the dial in the right direction. Yeah, the application piece I think we covered in that third quote. And then I think setting up that comfortable room, so really closing off the group to farmer only. Like I've been to kind of sessions around workforce development in the past, and they invite everyone into the room, which is great. But what I found from that experience is actually farmers shut down because I think everyone else, like the workforce development professionals like us, are the experts in the room, but really farmers are the experts of their experience. And if we want to kind of get them sharing on their experiences, reflecting on their experiences, we need to hold that space for them. And so I think that was one thing that really worked. And yeah, it was just really good to hear from people that was an impact. Some cautionary tales. So when people are struggling in their businesses with the fundamentals, they will struggle to engage with programs like Shift. So you need to really think about where your growers are at, or where your farmers are at with their businesses. If they're under a lot of economic pressures, they may not be ready to engage with this sort of stuff. We had a grower sort of put out a workforce challenge, but the solution for them was really more around HR policies and procedures, WHS, really with an underpinning of making sure that they were doing the right thing legislatively. That isn't what Shift is. Shift is more around that team culture, that team efficiency. So they needed to look at getting that right, and there's plenty of support programs in industry for that. And then what was beautiful is that then the next year or two later, they came to some of the Shift stuff. They were ready to sort of engage on that kind of level. From a grower, we got told, don't roll it out tick and flick. They do want that space to kind of share. And it can actually bring up some uncomfortable feelings when people start to kind of work in this space too. And I think that was something that not everyone is ready for. So I had a couple of guys who did stuff with their team, and then it led to having a really honest conversation with their team, which in the end was good for that to happen. But they said, you know, I had to be prepared to feel uncomfortable in that. So, it's getting people prepared that we're asking you to go into that growth space, into that learning zone, and that doesn't always feel so good. So normalizing that so that people can work their way through that, I think is really important too. So taking this forward, I guess our main takeaways were listen to growers. We really found our strategy of investigating the specific challenge in a workplace enterprise helped us find really practical, general kind of solutions. So I really like that zooming in to zoom out. Go behind the farm gate, meet the teams, create that safety to allow that vulnerability. Growers listen to growers. So, spotlight the grower. I would interview them. Joe would add insights from practice. I would draw out, they'd say something along the lines of, I just, drive around the ute with them next to me, and we sort of, just let the space be. And I'd be like, oh yeah, that's really great, because then what you're doing is you're letting them almost come to you, but you've got them there as an audience. Like we'd talk through what they're doing and try and find the transferable ideas in every solution. I thought we'd have pushback from people going, I'm a small operation. I only have one backpacker. Why is this relevant for me? But we actually didn't have that. It was more of a values kind of thing that engaged people with the project, and even small organizations could see how the ideas could transfer from larger organizations, or scale it up or scale it down. People can do this. Farm teams can do this. And I think really the sense that we got from people too was, we want more of this. We want more of this across our industry, because we want to be an industry of choice. For them, it wasn't just about me, the individual employer of choice. It was about agriculture becoming an industry of choice. And, that culture is different in different commodity groups too. But I think ultimately when we're talking about workforce development, and knowing what, we've learnt through some of the projects Amy Cosby's led, we know it's an attraction to agriculture, forestry, fisheries as a whole. That starts out, it's not always just specifically a commodity group. So yeah, it is about industry of choice. And I'm really sorry, we're on 2:00. I'm happy to stay and answer questions if people want to stay for 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll go into closing, and one of the techniques that we often use with growers is a check-in or a check-out process. So we'll use a checkout process today, which is, hey, just throw 2 words in one word if you can, 2 words if you can, into the chat group as you head away in a second. And they're just checkout words. And they can be everything from tired to overwhelmed to happy to excited to non-technical skills, whatever it is that you feel that you want to offer us, because it helps us get a sense of a feel of where we've managed collectively and collaboratively to go today. So thank you for brave people if you would go ahead and do that, because I know that sometimes it's not in our natural wheelhouse to do. We just want to jump off. And finally, it's a shout out to you, Nick, for leading such a great project. And for taking on board to have this open house and to have so many different industry sectors here is just fantastic. I know, we know, that our heart is in this work. We care about people, we care about workforce development, we care about the staff on our enterprises across all of our industries. And we certainly look forward to connecting with some of you again when the timing is right. We know some of you on the call are actively engaged in projects which are funded by industry organisations, by AgriFutures, etc. We wish you well with those projects, and we'd love to see the ecosystem where we join up, a lot more and do this share and care kind of stuff that we've done today. Reach out, please, if you'd like to. Check out the 2 words that are in there. It's fabulous to see them. And if anyone wants to hang around, open house, you might want to see a little bit more of that gorgeous kitchen or a little bit more of that view around people development. Hang on, stay with us. If not, we've loved having you here. Thank you. And we wish you well, and best wishes for 2025.